We're on talk number 46. I'm Erin May, and I'm here today with Bonnie Carroll. And Bonnie, I'm so excited to talk to you about your life and work with the dulcimer, in part because one of the first dulcimer books I ever got this is this is the copy that I've had and carried around for all of these years. It's taped together on the spine. The poor book. I have a newer version of it that I use now, but I had to pull out my original first one that I got. I got it for years and years and years, and it is such an incredible resource. And you're such a cool human. So thank you
Thank
for
you.
joining us today.
Thank you.
Uh,
I'm, I'm so glad that book was helpful to you, and it was helpful to me. I learned quite a lot.
Isn't that how it goes? If you really
Yeah.
want to learn a thing, you teach it and then you try to write it down and you realize how much it's still kind of tangled.
And I think the teacher and the writer learns the most of anybody in a class.
Yeah. Yeah, me too. Definitely. Uh, well, let's go back in time, Bonnie, to your childhood and just start us at the beginning of like how did music come into your life? How did dulcimers come into your life? How did you become a person whose whole life has been deeply embedded in a musical path?
Well, I think one of the brilliant things that my mother did was she realized right off the bat that I was way interested in music because she played the piano. And I sat at the piano with her, according to her. I can't vouch for her stories, but according to her, I sat at the piano with her when from age 3 and 4, and
Mm.
played along with her, whether she wanted me to or not. And so she just went, oh, she's interested in music, and so I had piano lessons starting at age 4. Which was it was before Suzuki and all the inspirational teaching of young kids. But
Mm.
so I played piano all the time I grew up, and I I don't know, some of my memorable pianos situations were playing for the junior high school chorus, and then playing for the community theater in Austin, Texas. And piano contests, and I was obviously way into it.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
um, then when I got to my first year of college, it was the beginning of the folk music renaissance. I got there in 1963, and somebody gave me a guitar, and my boyfriend at the time kind of taught me to play it because he wanted to play with me, and so I learned to play the guitar and was just completely entranced with the whole concept of music and folk culture. And so, even though my background had been in classical music and reading music and all that kind of stuff, I was way more interested in more informal music than I was
Hmm.
playing.
Hmm.
Like I played Chopin by ear, so to speak. Just if it, it more or less sounded like Chopin. And I started with the music, but I was much more into the feel of the music than I was into reading the notes very carefully.
Uh-huh. My sister used to embellish all of the classical pieces, and her teacher would be like, "That's not how Beethoven wrote it," and she'd be like, "Oh, mm,
Yeah, exactly.
here's
When I
how
play it, it
Beethoven wrote
sounds,
it."
yeah, you play it, it sounds better this way.
Yeah, exactly.
So I was a little ripe for a less structured kind of music
Yeah,
by the time I
yeah.
got a guitar. And then, have you ever met Ruth Guffey?
No, tell me more.
I don't know if she plays the dulcimer still, but she's the first person I heard play the dulcimer. She was at Reed College, where I was going to college, and I saw her play the dulcimer. And it wasn't like it was a momentous moment. I just remember that, oh, yeah, that girl played that dulcimer, and I
Yeah.
remember what a dulcimer is. And then that was my only contact with the dulcimer until I ran into Max Krimmel, who's now my sweetheart and has been for 53 or 4 years. um, and when we were his courting behavior, because he was at that time a guitar maker, a pretty good one. He was making guitars played by all kinds of famous musicians, and so his courting behavior was that he would make a dulcimer for whatever woman he was uh, after, and so he made one for me for Christmas.
Uh-huh.
And I got Gene Ritchie's book.
Yeah.
Yeah, just how, what is this thing? How do I do this? And I probably should have gotten Howie Mitchell's book. He was probably more in the genre that I was interested in. But anyway, when but the connection to Howie Mitchell was important because Howie had a lot of interesting ideas about almost everything in life. We turned out to be great friends and spent a lot of time together over the years. But his idea that you build dulcimers with the arches under the fingerboards to enhance the sound was brilliant. And almost all dulcimer makers do something to the fingerboard to make the instrument, because when you think about it, it's a big brace all the way across the top. So
Right.
how you make
Keep
that
the top
brace
from
is important.
vibrating.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. People do a lot of things. Max Spaden used to route out the inside um, of the fingerboard.
Yeah.
So,
Right. So it would be hollow and up inside of there.
so that was a brilliant idea. He had an idea about how to get the frets that was not brilliant. So then we left that pretty quickly.
Well, trial and error, right? Not every idea works.
And he had lots of those trial and error trials. He was a scientist and an experimenter at heart, and music was kind of his modality, but really mostly he was a scientist.
Mhm.
He used the dulcimer as a testing ground, so to speak.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's how I started. I got into it. I started playing. There wasn't such a thing as dulcimer clubs, and I couldn't find any. I mean, there were no other dulcimer players in the area, but I didn't think of that's not the way I approached the dulcimer. I just approached it as a musician. Oh, here's another instrument, sort of like
Right.
like piano clubs when you learn Chopin. um,
Yes.
so I, from the get-go, was relating. It was how do you relate this modal based instrument to what I was used to, the chromatic based instruments, and how to
Mhm.
make an interaction between those two.
Yeah. Yeah. Did did you sing with your instruments a lot at that point, or I think of you as mostly an instrumentalist, I realize, but that folk kind of revival thing was a lot about singing with your instruments too and using the instruments as
Uh-huh. I,
accompaniment.
s- I I sang with it a lot more at first than I do now. I'm more of an instrumentalist these days.
All right.
Got
Yeah.
that right.
And were
But
you
I
in
was always,
Colorado at that point?
huh?
Were you in Colorado at that point then?
Uh-huh.
I know that's where you are now.
Yes.
Yeah.
I came
So
to Colorado in '63 and went
so there
to,
was certainly folk music happening in that area, but not dulcimer, right? Not
exactly.
dulcimer.
But then, there was a lot more in Boulder where I live. There was a lot of, is the genesis of a lot of the early folk rock. And, there was lots and lots of music around, but it wasn't necessarily traditional or
Yeah. Hmm.
more singer-songwriter and rock and roll and that kind of thing.
Yeah. It's it's kind of interesting to me. You've got sort of the Gene Ritchie and a lot of the East Coast legacy is the very kind of traditional old time Appalachian music. And then there's sort of this vein of like the West Coast Renaissance fair kind of music, which was pulling some of those threads, but a lot of different things. And then I think there's kind of like a Midwestern scene too, which was just like we're unaware of all of the other traditions in some
Uh-huh.
ways. Like that's how I feel like I learned. I didn't know anything about either the West Coast or the East Coast dulcimer scene. but I knew about you and I knew about David Schnoffer and I knew about Gary Gallier, like some of these Midwest folks, that there is kind of its own different culture in each region, I think, based on who was around and who you got to learn from.
Uh-huh. In 1976, I made a trip to the from our place in Colorado to the East Coast, and my goal was to stop and visit any dulcimer player I could round up, just to try and learn about, where are the dulcimer players and what are they doing, and so I ran into Anne Grimes in Ohio, who was a
Okay.
collector at that time. Um, and she bought a dulcimer from me, and I thought, well, this is pretty good. I mean, she wasn't the first stop I made, but maybe close. And I thought, well, that's a good start to this trip.
Yeah.
And so I built for a few years before I got out playing, because I had worked in mental health was my chosen field, and I have degrees in psychology, which I think everybody could use. It's really helpful to know how human beings work, given that we encounter them so often.
We have to interact with each other. What's that about?
Exactly. But anyway, I lost my job in the Reagan era funding cutbacks of the mental health field, and Max said, "Well, I could teach you to make dulcimers." So I did that for a few years before I kind of tried to find other dulcimer players. And after about 2 years, I went first to the Kindred Gathering, and I thought, well, that's a pretty interesting phenomenon. And those people they're really a lot more fun than the psychology field is. I'm not blind. I had become aware that there was a big scene in the East, lots of dulcimer players, and I wanted to see what they were doing and what
Sure.
the situation was. So
Yeah, and at that point in time, the way you did that was by going to find them, right?
uh-huh.
Yeah.
Got in my car and drove east. And interestingly, I had Keith Young's name,
Hmm.
Maddie, from
Hmm.
the Dulcimer Players News. And so I called up Keith when I got to the DC area, and he says, "Well, there's an event tomorrow that everybody you want to meet is going to be at. Why don't you just come?" And it was Maddie and Phil's wedding.
Wow.
And so I did meet millions of people, including Maddie and Phil. And that night I didn't have anywhere to stay. And Maddie said, "Oh, you can sleep on our floor." So I spent Maddie and Phil's wedding night with them,
Oh my
sleeping.
goodness.
I know it was a different time than we have now.
Yeah. Yeah. But
So
those are the moments that are like, oh, this is the best of humanity, right? We just sort of take care of each other, and you're a friend of a friend, or you have a connection to me, and so you're a person that I want to make sure is taken care of.
you play the dulcimer? Come on in.
Yeah, exactly. You must be a great human. You play the dulcimer.
Exactly. And I think that is still true.
I think so too.
The people that are attracted to the dulcimer are a whole different crowd
Mhm.
than as a a generalization. I think they're so different than
Yeah.
the rest of the culture.
There's still that really, really strong value in looking out for each other and
Mhm.
welcoming people in. And I really,
And a
I really
kindness.
appreciate that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I bet you everybody wants to mother you a little bit because you're so much younger than
I
most.
have a lot of aunties and uncles, that's for sure.
I bet. I bet. How can we help but, Aaron?
Yeah. Well, and because I did start so young playing the dulcimer, and I did have all the sort of aunties and uncles and the mothering through the community, that's also a big part of why I kind of turned around the year I turned 30 and went, oh, there's needs to be another next generation, and I'm the person who can start being the mothering. Like I had this moment of recognizing it's time for me to turn that around. And um, so that really inspired me because of the experience I had of being so well mentored, um,
Uh-huh.
to try to be a mentor.
And did you find young people to mentor, or did you end up mentoring all of us and how to get to technology from where we were?
Well, there has, it's that's the beautiful thing, isn't it? That we can all teach each other, that we all have something. There's so much wisdom that I get from my older students, and
Uh-huh.
there are things I know because I'm the next generation younger, and then I have found younger students to also mentor through. So it's pretty cool. I love how interconnected the generations are in the Dulcimer community. That's one of the things that to me is probably why it's still so special and magical, is that there are all of the generations represented.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Well, so side that was a little sidebar, but I really value it so much that our community kind of works together. Um, so you started with mountain dulcimer, you started building mountain dulcimers, you started connecting with other mountain dulcimer players, and eventually hammer dulcimer also came into the picture. I see your beautiful hammer dulcimer sitting beside behind you there. When did that happen?
Well, I was touring, performing and trying to be a professional musician. And I played in Dallas at Poor David's Pub. And I met Dana Hamilton there. And I guess they had set up for me to stay at Dana's house. And so Dana showed me how to play the hammered dulcimer. And, if you play the piano or the drums, the dulcimer is a breeze. And so just right off the bat, I could play it. And I think temperamentally, the psychologist in me says that the hammered dulcimer suited my personality a little bit better than the mountain dulcimer did. Did you ever know Larkin Bryant?
She's another one whose book was really important to me, and I didn't really get to know her. But I certainly was influenced by her.
Yeah, she's a very gentle and person, and I think that the mountain dulcimer was perfect for her. But I was touring at the time with her, and so all of this kind of congealed. Dana showing me how to play hammer dulcimer, and Larkin being the perfect personality for the mountain dulcimer. And I kind of, it just all of a sudden hit that, oh yeah, this is an instrument that probably suits me a little better. I knew how to play the mountain dulcimer by this time well
Yeah.
enough that I could call it my own. But anyway, so Dana built hammer dulcimer, and he offered to trade me a hammer dulcimer he had made for a mountain dulcimer that I had made. So I thought, well, you know, I could sell it if it turns out it doesn't work out. That'll be
Right. What is
fine.
there to lose?
And so I took it, but I immediately shipped it home because I didn't know how to play it. And it was, just nothing but kind of a baggage on that trip. But then I got home, and for the next year, um, I really didn't do anything but play the hammer dulcimer. And it was a little bit like how I'd learned the mountain dulcimer when I skipped a little part of my development as a mountain dulcimer player. So I ran into uh, David Snoffer at Cosby, because I don't know if it was the first trip I made back to the East or maybe in subsequent years, and we ended up touring together for a while, and so I spent that year not doing anything but playing mountain dulcimer. So
Uh-huh.
it's kind of like the Beatles at the Liverpool pub. If you play 8 hours a day for a year or so, there's no option. You get reasonably good at it.
You kind of figure it out.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And so I did that. I did that stint with David Snoffer. We toured for several years and worked together in various ways. Then I got the hammer dulcimer and did exactly the same thing with the hammer dulcimer. And a year, and I think it was the end of the first year that I played that I won the National Mountain Hammer Dulcimer Contest. And so, I was really off and running with it.
Yeah.
I didn't consider what it was going to be like to drag it all over the place and set it up and clean it every time I wanted to play and all this.
Uh-huh.
When you're young, you've got plenty of energy for all that stuff. So it's a little bit of a pain of an instrument.
Yeah.
Nothing like, mountain dulcimer, you can take it around with you and it's, and whistle's just that much closer to really easy.
Yeah, right. Right.
Monica.
Yeah, and it sounds so beautiful. So I suppose it's worth it to do all of that.
And do you play hammer dulcimer at all?
So my story is that our family got a hammer dulcimer when I was in like high school, early teen years, and I was like, "Oh, I'm gonna learn to play this too." And then we went to a dulcimer festival, and my sister is a fiddle player at a dulcimer festival, and she was bored out of her mind. And I was just so excited to be around other mountain dulcimer players that as much as I wanted to also learn how to play the hammer dulcimer, I was obsessed with soaking in as much as I could from the mountain dulcimer players. So what happened at that very first festival is that my sister took all the hammer dulcimer classes, and in one weekend it went from like both of us could hammer out a tune kind of badly to she could play real music and I could still hammer out a tune really badly, and I was like, never mind, it's yours, you can have it. I never got really past that first couple of tunes, but
Knowing Amber a little bit, I can well imagine all of that.
yes.
Oh,
Yep. And I can remember when she got the big dusty strings hammer dulcimer, and I said, it's fine, but I'm not carrying that around for you. And then she, like, within a month or so, broke her foot, and I was carrying it
that.
around for her, and I was like, wait a minute.
I remember that, yes. And you carried your dulcimer around, and then you got Hodgkins, and she wheeled you around.
Yes, it's true. We did do a fair amount of taking care of each other.
Yes, that's great.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, so I was still in the situation of it's just a musical instrument, it's another musical instrument.
Yeah.
Hammer dulcimer, mountain dulcimer, and I still wasn't as embedded in the dulcimer scene as you get when you live where there's a lot of other dulcimer players. And when I played around here, I was always playing with people who didn't play the dulcimer. And so this contributed a lot to my interest in how to relate the instruments, because dulcimers are taught in most situations as just modal instruments. If you get any theory at all, it's minimal.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
Its tuning has a name, and it's called this mode name.
yeah, exactly. And then people would at that time were saying how limited the mountain dulcimer was. Well, that's only because it has a different music theory than the kind of musical instruments that they're accustomed to, and they don't happen to know that music theory.
Yeah.
And so I got quite interested in trying to figure out how to translate between those two languages. So that was one of the genesis of a book that I wrote about how to play the mountain dulcimer.
Yeah.
Because I was still much more steeped in chromatic music than I was in relating to everything's diatonic. Never mind that when you find rock and roll, blues, any old kind of music, it's diatonic basically.
Right. It's often pentatonic.
It's frequently pentatonic.
Yeah, it's like, wow, my dulcimer has too many notes still.
Exactly. This note doesn't sound good, no, in blues. But anyway, so I really came from that orientation more than. but the modal stuff, lots of music is modal all over the world. And once you know the modal stuff, folk instruments all over the world are modal most of the time. And
Mhm. Yeah.
so,
So how did the marimba and those influences come in? And
well, I mean, anybody who plays the piano can play the marimba. It's set up exactly the same way. Its touch is so easy. You take little sticks and hit notes. So I was in, let's see, where did I first run into marimbas? I guess probably it was in Nicaragua. And I worked for the local sister city with Nicaragua. Boulder has a sister city with Nicaragua, the Jalapa, Nicaragua. So, and I went to Nicaragua on an arts tour. Somebody in Boston actually organized musicians to go and play with Nicaraguan musicians, and artists of various sorts to just go and experience what was going on with Nicaragua in the 80s or the 70s, and so I went there about 1980, and we met up with other musicians, and a lot of people in our group were theater people, so we wrote a play in Spanish and took it all over the country and performed it. We did the sets, we did so we got to paint, and we got to play music, and I was the musician, and the other people were the actors. But it was a really interesting experience.
yeah.
During that experience, though, I ran into the Palacios brothers, who were kind of Nicaragua's marimba makers, and their shop was something else. They had a workbench out in the backyard, and they worked on the workbench. And as you looked around the many, many trees around their yard, the marimbas, while they were the glue was drying, or in various processes of being built, were all hung in the trees. That was where they hung their instruments. So it was like marimbas are growing on trees.
That's amazing.
And the marimbas that they built were diatonic. We didn't spend a lot of time discussing diatonia or anything. We just played music, and
Yeah.
anyway. I met that, and I thought I could do this. So I came back very interested in marimbas, hunted around for Latin American marimba for a while, because Guatemala's got a very highly developed marimba culture, and that was kind of more looking for that.
Hmm.
But there just wasn't a Latin American marimba scene in Boulder, Colorado. Go figure. But there
Alas.
was, go figure, an African marimba scene. And it's interesting that the marimbas came to the United States through a cultural exchange program at the University of Washington. They hired a African teacher to come, and he ended up teaching a lot of locals how to build and play the African marimbas that he was familiar with. And it's really fun when you get like 7 or 8 players, and you have 7 or 8 marimbas, and there's the big bass and the little tiny soprano, and you get interesting African polyrhythms going, and it's totally fascinating as a musician.
Yeah.
Whole different thing. So I got quite interested in that, and Max did too, my partner, and he made us a set of marimbas. And so he made, I think Max had made 9 marimbas altogether. Does that sound right? Something like that. And so anywhere there is one of the African sets, it becomes kind of a center for that area of marimbas, because the key is to have the set of marimbas, and then you can have a whole bunch of different sets of people playing on them. And at one point, we had 3 different marimba bands that ran from our house. But there was another group of people then in Boulder that started kind of playing about the same time we did, and they went on and made it a career in the sense of, becoming a marimba school. And there's 3 or 4 places in the United States where there are these marimba schools. And so
Wow,
they're one of them. So we have a really big marimba scene here.
that's fantastic. Um, hmm.
And because of my background, um, I found it a lot easier if I would write a piece of music down to learn it than doing it by ear. The African
Okay.
marimbas are a completely oral tradition, and so but I would just write it down for myself so that I could um, learn it more easily.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then people would see my music and they would say, oh, anybody who's got the background that I have, as opposed to the oral tradition background,
Right.
wanted, can I borrow, and I didn't feel like I could really pass it around because there was a lot of concern in that scene over intellectual property rights issues.
Hmm.
You know, reasonably so, should be. And
Hmm.
so I felt like I needed to, before I was going to give it to anybody, I had to work through all those issues. There was also, because of the initial person who brought this music to the United States, didn't read music, and he explained to all these musicians who also didn't read music that you couldn't write this music down. It was just not music that could be written down. And I'm like, their music that can be written down. So,
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
I fought that kind of prejudice on the
Yeah.
part of really North American musicians. Once I got in touch with
How
the African
interesting.
musicians, they would say things like, well, if we knew how to write it down, we would.
Right.
Or, they were happy for me to use their music in books that I might want to read or write. And so I ended up writing 5 books of all the music that was being taught in North America by these mostly Zimbabwean musicians. And
Wow.
the Africans loved it. The North Americans took a little while, but they've kind of come around to it now. So,
It is really interesting the way we kind of get set in a mindset of like this is the right way to do it, and then it can be really hard to break out of that.
uh-huh.
But I kind of don't buy that there's a right way of playing music, right? Or learning music. And yeah.
How do we balance this really admirable and general and admirable desire to understand a particular tradition
Yeah.
with polluting it with our own way of playing music, and watching what the African scene, the North American musician African scene went through with the this is the right way to do it. You can't write it down, must be passed on by a teacher, blah, blah, blah. It's exactly the same thing as the early days of the Irish music scene. How can we play Irish music and understand what that tradition is about if we begin by translating it into our tradition?
Hmm.
So it was interesting to watch those very similar processes.
Yeah. Yeah. So what's your conclusion now? Can we translate it? Do we change it when we play it? And is that good or bad? What do you think?
I think it's just fine. I don't think Ry Cooder is worried about this when he goes to Africa and plays with traditional musicians. I think they're sharing.
Yeah, that's
I'm
that's
never.
very much how I feel about it too, that like traditions are always changing. No one can come to a tradition without having whatever background they already have.
Uh-huh.
And as long as we respect each other, then
It's an
that's all there is
additive,
to it, right?
an
Do it
additive
however it works for
process.
you.
It's an additive process, not a destructive process.
Yes, I love that. What a great way of saying it.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
but I think that's we human beings have trouble with change of any sort. But
Yeah.
I'm actually not one of those. I love change. I love new things, and I love
You love adventure too, right? So I want to make sure we
Adventure.
have a second to talk about the river trips that you led. The moons and tunes, right?
Yes. Well, in 1997, somebody invited me to raft the Grand Canyon, which is a 225-mile stretch river in the wilderness. And uh, I had been on river trips and knew I wasn't that crazy about them. They're all right. Then I did the Grand Canyon and realized that how you set them up and where you go is really important, and
Mm.
that's what makes the trip. And I understood enough about what makes a really outstanding trip that I came back and said, well, I want to do this a lot more. I'm probably not necessarily river guide material. And but I do know how to organize stuff. So one of the things the river companies all need is someone to bring customers to them. And so I thought, if I and I know a lot of people and who would really love to do this, bring their, and I got this idea. There are lots of situations where you can listen to music on a river
Mm.
trip. Their musicians get hired by rafting companies to bring their instruments and perform.
Uh, uh-huh.
But what about taking a bunch of musicians and everybody just brings their musical instruments? That was my idea. And so we did that. The first trip was in canoes, and it was on mostly flat water, and it worked just fine. So then I spent 30, 20 years doing 35 trips, all in the Colorado Plateau mostly. So we did the various runs on the Green River and the Colorado River and the San Juan and the Yampa. And then we also did some Idaho rivers. Idaho has wonderful rivers that are quite challenging and interesting. Big, lots of wilderness. And then we did Alaska one year, and we did the
Wow.
Grand Canyon 6 more times. And so we became, I think, official river rats, or river trash is another name for it.
I
And
love it.
it was wonderful. We did it right until the pandemic, and then we stopped.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And then I think we're just old enough that it's really probably not that safe. You do have to be able to take care of yourself in the wilderness, and harder.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So we're exploring what in the world can people this age do in the way of adventure and explorations.
Yeah. Yeah. What have you discovered so far?
Well, so far, Max and I are living in this just incredibly interesting group home situation. I've always been interested in communities, and friends of mine would join co-housing projects, that kind of thing. And I never had or first it was communes. Remember those? You were more.
I've read about them.
Yes. And they're all over New Mexico. And I always was dreamed of going and living with a group of people in the wilderness. And
Mhm.
so anyway, I missed the commune thing, but I was interested. I looked at it from the outside. Same
Uh-huh.
with the co-housing situation. And
Hmm.
then, a lot of people, when they get to this age that I am, I'm 78, but maybe starting around 70, you think, well, if you don't have kids, we have Erin, she'll take care of us. But if in case you get too busy to take care of all of your aunties, what are we going to do? And so we did a lot of exploration around what different communities are like.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
but it's at age 70, before we explored the communities, what we did was, and I think almost everyone does this. Well, here's what I'll do. I'm going to get a bunch of my friends together. We're going to get a big house, and we'll hire a nurse and a cook and a housekeeper, and we'll just all live there. Well, it turns out that this retirement home that we live in they've already done the difficult part, hiring the people to take care of us.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the people that live here have that same consciousness of what's it like to live in a community, and
Mhm.
how do you contribute and how do you take care of the various different needs of the community. Like one of my favorite things that has happened since I've been here was we were playing a game that's, I don't know if you know the game bocce. It,
Okay.
it,
Yes.
you throw balls and
Uh-huh.
this little court. And anyway, somebody was playing that everybody knows to be a little bit shy on balance ability. He started to fall, and before he even got this far into a fall, there were five people up, set him back on his feet. It didn't even slow the game down. It was just like, oh, that's what you do around here.
Uh-huh.
And if you have a skill you'd like to bring to the situation, the staff is hired to facilitate whatever it is we think would be,
Oh.
instead of, I mean, there's a certain amount of both of these. They sometimes plan stuff for us, but also a lot of the interesting stuff is driven by the residents. Like, for example, I have in the last, this summer, I set as my goal to get a chorus started and to get a marimba group started. So they launch in September, in a week. I'm celebrating.
Bonnie, that's great.
But everybody brings their particular skills, and we have so many interesting stuff here, so much interesting stuff,
Yeah.
because the staff will take advantage of the residents and their knowledge. Like, I was trying to put a budget together for this. The University of Colorado budget a person. I mean, like, that's an important part of the person at the University of Colorado. He lives here. And so I
Oh.
said, so Jim, would you help me put together a budget? And he knows how to talk all the little budgety terms, and it's just,
Uh-huh.
and
I love that.
if you want to hear a lecture on water quality in the West, well, the guy that originated lives here, and it's just we facilitate people sharing in those ways. So it's a totally fascinating place to live. So this is the next chapter: living in an apartment after living in the mountains for 50 years.
Yeah.
But there's
Yeah, so you were telling me that in this process of like quasi retirement, whatever that whatever
yeah,
that means for a musician who's never gonna really stop playing, right? But you
exactly.
are doing a sale right now, is that right?
Well, I have lots of, not tons, but I have books and CDs that
Yeah.
are left over from my dulcimer touring era, and I'm gonna do a sale and try and reduce the stuff around here that I don't have any use for. So watch for that, everybody. I'll if you want to contact me, I'll tell you what I have. But I also will be putting out I'm going to redo my website and put on it what I do have and what's for sale, and so bonniecarroll.com will have the information.
Okay, good. Yeah. That's I look forward to knowing more about that when you're doing it. For
For
sure.
years, anybody who showed any interest at all, like I would have sent you a new dust off book if you hadn't said you had a new one.
I do have a new one, but I do cherish my
Yeah.
my falling apart one that I've had for all these years. And this is a pretty special treasure to me. I, I have to tell you, Bonnie, that the thing about this book that was, I mean, the music and the learning part of it were really important for me. But the other thing that was really important to me about this book was all the pictures you had in here of gatherings. And I
Uh-huh.
often talk about being a kid in Kansas, looking at these pictures, like here's one of a big gathering,
Uh-huh.
through this book, longingly thinking, I wish I was alive when there was dulcimer gatherings because I had no idea that it was still going on.
Uh-huh.
And just that like knowing that community was had formed around this and then discovering that community is continuing to form around it was just like this really, really powerful thing for me. So thank you for putting all the pictures
Wow.
in the book in addition to the music. That was like it really mattered to me as a kid.
That's wonderful. That's great to hear.
It's those little things, right? That
Yeah,
make a
exactly.
huge difference in our lives. So.
Yeah.
Okay, well, Bonnie, I could talk to you for a million years about all the amazing things you have done, and I feel like to me one of the coolest things about music is that you can just keep exploring it and you never stop discovering new things in it. And like your journey of going from classical piano and theater to mountain dulcimer and modal music to hammer dulcimer to marimba and all the music of the world that you've explored around this. Didn't even get to talk about like all the bands, the contra dance music, all the things that you've done over the history of your life, but you have been a person who just is constantly exploring in nature and in music, and I feel super grateful that you've been such an example of the endless exploration that's possible. And I'm excited for you and the things that you're doing now in this season of your life too. I just love hearing that you are still discovering and exploring and putting together groups and making music. So thank you for doing all of that.
And Aaron, you're going to be that person too. When you're my age, you will have a story to tell like
I
this
hope so.
too. Well,
I
you've got that personality too.
I love it. All right. Well, thank you, Bonnie. Everybody be sure and check out bonniecarroll.com, Bonnie's website, and I definitely recommend the Dust Off That Dulcimer and Dance book. So go get yourself a copy if you don't have it. And all the other ones too.
Thank
So,
you.
all right. Thank you, friends. See you later. Bye,
Thank you
Bonnie.
for listening.
Yay. That was so great.